2. The dominance of science. Science now held a position of unique honour among the first men. This was not so much because it was in this field that the race long ago, during its high noon, had thought most rigorously, nor because it was through science that men had gained some insight into the nature of the physical world, but rather because the application of scientific principles had revolutionised their material circumstances. The once fluid doctrines of science had by now begun to crystallise into a fixed and intricate dogma, but inventive scientific intelligence still exercised itself brilliantly in improving the technique of industry, and thus completely dominated the imagination of a race in which the pure intellectual curiosity had waned. The scientist was regarded as an embodiment not merely of knowledge, but of power, and no legends of the potency of science seemed too fantastic to be believed. A century after the founding of the First World State, a rumour began to be heard in China about the supreme secret of scientific religion, the awful mystery of Godelpus, by means of which it should be possible to utilise the energy locked up in the opposition of proton and electron. Long ago discovered by a Chinese physicist and saint, this invaluable knowledge was now reputed to have been preserved ever since among the elite of science, and to be ready for publication as soon as the world seemed fit to possess it. The new sect of energists claimed that the young discoverer was himself an incarnation of Buddha, and that, since the world was still unfit for the supreme revelation, he had entrusted his secret to the scientists. On the side of Christianity, a very similar legend was concerned with the same individual. The regenerate Christian Brotherhood, by now the overwhelmingly most powerful of Western churches, regarded the discoverer as the Son of God, who, in this his second coming, had proposed to bring about the millennium by publishing the secret of divine power, but, finding the people still unable to put in practice even the more primitive gospel of love, which was announced at his first coming, he had suffered martyrdom for man's sake, and had entrusted his secret to the scientists. The scientific workers of the world had long ago organised themselves as a close corporation. Entrance to the International College of Science was to be obtained only by examination and the payment of high fees. Membership conferred the title of scientist and the right to perform experiments. It was also an essential qualification for many lucrative posts. Moreover, there were said to be certain technical secrets which members were pledged not to reveal. Rumour had it that, in at least one case of minor blabbing, the traitor had shortly afterwards mysteriously died. Science itself, the actual corpus of natural knowledge, had by now become so complex that only a tiny fraction of it could be mastered by one brain. Thus, students of one branch of science knew practically nothing of the work of others in kindred branches. Especially was this the case with the huge science called subatomic physics. Within this were contained a dozen studies, any one of which was as complex as the whole of the physics of the 19th Christian century. This growing complexity had rendered students in one field ever more reluctant to criticise, or even try to understand, the principles of other fields. Each petty department, jealous of its own preserves, was meticulously respectful of the preserves of others. In an earlier period, the sciences had been coordinated and criticised philosophically by their own leaders and by the technical philosophers, but philosophy as a rigorous technical discipline no longer existed. There was, of course, a vague framework of ideas or assumptions based on science and common to all men, a popular pseudoscience constructed by the journalists from striking phrases current among scientists. But actual scientific workers prided themselves on the rejection of this ramshackle structure, even while they themselves were unwittingly assuming it, and each insisted that his own special subject must inevitably remain unintelligible even to most of his brother scientists. Under these circumstances, when rumour declared that the mystery of Godelpus was known to the physicists, each department of subatomic physics was both reluctant to deny the charge explicitly in its own case, and ready to believe that some other department really did possess the secret. Consequently, the conduct of the scientists as a body strengthened the general belief that they knew and would not tell. About 2 centuries after the formation of the First World State, the President of the world declared that the time was ripe for a formal union of science and religion, and called a conference of the leaders of these two great disciplines. Upon that island in the Pacific, which had become the Mecca of cosmopolitan sentiment, and was by now one vast, many-storied and cloud-capped temple of peace, The heads of Buddhism, Mohammedanism, Hinduism, the regenerate Christian Brotherhood, and the modern Catholic Church in South America agreed that their differences were but differences of expression. One and all were worshippers of the divine energy, whether expressed in activity or intense stillness. One and all recognised the saintly discoverer as either the last and greatest of the prophets or an actual incarnation of divine movement, and these two concepts were easily shown in the light of modern science to be identical. In an earlier age, it had been the custom to single out heresy and extirpate it with fire and sword, but now the craving for uniformity was fulfilled by explaining away differences amid universal applause. When the conference had registered the unity of the religions, it went on to establish the unity of religion and science. All knew, said the President, that some of the scientists were in possession of the supreme secret, though wisely they would not definitely admit it. It was time, then, that the organisations of science and religion should be merged for the better guidance of men. He therefore called upon the International College of Science to nominate from amongst themselves a select body, which should be sanctified by the Church and called the Sacred Order of Scientists. These custodians of the supreme secret were to be kept at public expense. They were to devote themselves wholly to the service of science, and in particular to research into the most scientific manner of worshipping the divine Godolpus. Of the scientists present, some few looked distinctly uncomfortable, but the majority scarcely concealed their delight under dignified and thoughtful hesitation. Among the priests also two expressions were visible, but on the whole it was felt that the Church must gain by thus gathering into herself the unique prestige of science. And so it was that the order was founded, which was destined to become the dominant force in human affairs until the downfall of the First World Civilization.